Israel failed to consider when they expelled 750,000 Palestinians 73 years ago was that their grandchildren, now from all over the world, are coming back. We're here. Free, free Palestine!
Welcome to the Progressive Hub Show. This is your host for this week, Ricci Sergienko. I am streaming from Los Angeles. I am joined by Shatha, an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement. And I just played a video that should be inspiring for everyone on the pro-Palestinian side. That the only thing Israel, the person saying, the only thing Israel failed to consider when they expelled 750,000 Palestinians 75 years ago is that their grandchildren are coming back and they're here. And Shatha, you are a part of Palestinian Youth Movement. You have been organizing for the past few years that I've known you, and you take this issue very seriously. And so I'm so happy that we can have you here on this show. And how are you doing?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. This month has been a blur, but I think I can say we're all hanging in there. We're just fighting and fighting and fighting, and it's never going to end. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. And so we are recording on November 2nd. This is nearly a month removed from the October 7th attack. And there has been a lot going on, but we can see every day what is happening in Gaza. But do you want to talk about just contextualize what is happening in Gaza now and for the past 17 years?
Yeah, so Gaza has been under a siege for 17 years. I want people to understand that it's a land, sea, and air blockade, in which the Zionist entity controls Gaza's electricity, food, water. The UN said that in 2021, Gaza would be unlivable. And now we're 2023, and this is the sixth bombing campaign that they've endured in the past 17 years. Half of their population are children. So the average 17-year-old in Gaza has lived through these genocidal bombing campaigns, 6 of them. And it's so horrific that there was a therapist or a psychologist from, I think, Norway who said that the children of Gaza don't have PTSD because there's no post. It's just consistent trauma. 97% of their water was toxic previous to this. Their healthcare, infrastructure has entirely collapsed. I think there's 2 out of the 22 hospitals that are still operating. When they do operate, they have to use cell phone cameras as lighting for procedures. They don't have anesthesia, so sometimes they play Quran in the background. The death toll, and what's so horrific about the death toll is that it changes every 5 minutes. It could be 9,000 and then it's 9,500 in the next 2 minutes. So right now it's 9,000. There are thousands unaccounted for under the rubble. And there are more than 1.5 million internally displaced in Gaza. Israel just bombed the largest refugee camp in Gaza, Jabalia refugee camp, which houses around 100,000 Palestinians. And this refugee camp is from 1948, from the Nakba. And it housed Palestinians who fled from the villages after being ethnically cleansed by, Zionist.
So yeah, it's not, but let me say that just so people know and have a clear definition of the Nakba, can just to restate that for people.
Yeah, so the Nakba translates to the word the catastrophe. It happened in 1948. It's where more than 700,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their homeland. So in that video that you played, when they mentioned 73, 75 years ago, it's the Nakba, which is what they're referring to, where our grandparents and great-grandparents were ethnically cleansed from. And it's created or set up the stage for the colonial state. And the Zionist colonial state could only exist on ethnic cleansing genocide, and it can only continue to thrive on the same mechanisms.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are people that don't understand that Gaza is literally an open air prison, right? Like, can you describe pre-October 7th what Gaza looked like and was like for the people living there?
Yeah, I'll give a personal story. A lot of people were saying, when Palestinians resist or fight back, conditions will get worse and they will die. They have been dying. They've been dying for 16 years. Whether it's a slow death or one of the 6 genocidal bombing campaigns that Israel conducts. So 97% of their water is toxic. The healthcare industry is completely crippled, collapsed. My uncle had cancer in his leg. And in order for you to go get treatment, because a lot of the medical equipment needed for specific, procedures or ailments are not available, you have to apply to get a permit to Egypt. And 90% of these permits are denied. So he applied for this permit, did not get it, and he just died slowly. And we just had to watch him die. We couldn't do anything about that. So Palestinians, it's so bad that when Palestinian fishermen in Gaza go out beyond a specific perimeter, they're sniped and they're killed. And the fish does not exist beyond that perimeter. So they're basically starving them. They've been the Israeli politicians. So when we describe the situation in Gaza as genocide, don't listen to Palestinians, listen to what Israeli politicians say. The Israeli finance minister, compared people in Gaza to human animals. Previously, they've described their bombing campaigns as mowing the lawn, referring to just completely carpet bombing as well. They said that they would keep people in Gaza on a diet. So people in Gaza have been living under one of the most brutal conditions possible. The only way that they can rebuild their homes is by using the rubble that their homes, once existed under or once were made out of. So people in Gaza have not been living. They've tried so many times to call on the international community. Now, obviously, Gaza being an open air prison is a violation of international law. Nearly everything Israel does is a violation of international law.
Yes.
There's an international community to condemn this.
Does international law even exist? Is it real other than on paper and online?
If it's real, it does not apply to Palestinians. It's
right.
Collective and who, gets to be protected.
You're saying, your uncle had cancer. Israel the other day just bombed a cancer hospital. And they continue to attack hospitals and refugee camps. And by international law, as you're saying, these are war crimes. And dropping white phosphorus. There's been continuous war crimes over and over again. And so, yeah, it is really bad right now. But it's been going on for the past 16 years, as you've said. But the violence isn't stopping in Gaza either. We've seen an uptake in people injured and killed in the West Bank as well. And Hamas isn't in the West Bank. So that's just an example of the settler colonial project that is Israel. They won't stop killing Palestinians. It's not about one group. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, what has the reaction been where you are over the past few weeks? How do you see any changes?
Sorry, could you repeat the last part? Have we seen any?
How do you see any changes in public opinion? Maybe it came out super hard in one direction and has changed, or it has gone in the same direction. Anything that you've noticed?
Well, we've seen not just in Canada, but in the international, arena, people rise up for the Palestinian cause like we've never seen before. Like we've organized so many protests. These numbers are just unprecedented. And it goes to show that the people do not support their government's fascist and genocidal policies. They don't support the way that the media is portraying things, and that they refuse to be complicit in this atrocity and the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, we've seen millions of people around the world rise up for Palestine. And I think it's important for people to know that these protests would not have been possible without the organizing that had gone on years and years before this moment. And so Palestinian Youth Movement, which you're a part of, and, I've been going to protests here in Los Angeles over the past 4 to 5 years, and I've seen them grow and grow and grow. And the mobilization that we're seeing now, it was only possible due to the organizing of groups like PYN. And so one question I wanted to ask is, why do you organize with PYN? And we can get on to what are the current demands and goals. But first start with, why are you part of Palestinian Youth Movement?
So the Palestinian Youth Movement, just to give context, is a transnational grassroots organization made up of Palestinians and Arabs in exile. And we fight for the liberation of our homeland and the eventual return back to our lands. So as Palestinians in the diaspora, as Arabs in the diaspora in exile, we have, as youth especially, we have a role to play in our people's struggle. When our people rise up back home, it's our responsibility to support their calls and rise up alongside them. We feel it is integral to mobilize our communities in support of our people. And we need to demonstrate to not just the world, but our people back home that we will continue to support their demands, to uplift their calls, and we'll continue to push for their struggle.
Yes, and what are the specific demands and calls that you are currently putting out from PYN?
So we have 3 major calls right now. The first is for an immediate ceasefire. I don't know if I can, swear on this thing, but not the BS human.
You can swear.
Okay. Well, not the bullshit humanitarian. Not the bullshit humanitarian pause that we've been seeing. Like, what the fuck is that? Just pausing genocide? I don't understand how that is even something that people can say with a straight face. So we demand an immediate end to the ceasefire. And ceasefire is status quo. That is not peace and not justice. We demand an end to the genocide in Gaza. So as you mentioned, they've been using white phosphorus. They've bombed, which is war crime, obviously. And white phosphorus is a substance that when it hits you, it does not stop burning you until you hit bone. They've been bombing hospitals. They've been bombing ambulances. They've been bombing doctors. They've been bombing nurses. They've been bombing paramedics. They've been bombing journalists, 23 journalists, and not just them, but also their family, in an attempt to silence them with what's been going on. They've been bombing schools. So my family, for example, are scattered across different schools. And the reason why they're scattered is because if one school gets bombed, then the entire family will not be wiped out. So we've seen the number 2 weeks ago was 47 families wiped off of the Gaza registry. That means that the grandfather to the smallest baby, that entire lineage, cousins, no one exists anymore. And the death toll right now is, 9,000 with thousands and thousands of trouble, more than 1 million internally displaced. And half of these are children. When you're indiscriminately bombing, you are guaranteeing that you are bombing children. That's not to say that the women and men of Gaza, should die, but the international community tends to just look at children as, the innocent, but we don't even have that as Palestinians. We've been called by Israeli politicians children of darkness. They've said that no Palestinian is innocent. Everyone is a terrorist. This is genocidal rhetoric. This is genocidal calls for genocide. And the media has been manufacturing consent for this genocide. And we've seen this in Iraq, in 2003, and we ended up with 1 million Iraqis dead. And we are going through the same cycle of this dehumanization. So our first is an immediate ceasefire and end to this genocide. Our second is we demand an end to U.S., British, Canadian, whatever government you're under, complicity. And that includes funding, that includes weapon sales, and that includes political impunity. So bullshit statements like we unequivocally, support the right for Israel to defend itself while they're massacring children. It's egregious. It is depravity beyond compare. So that is our second demand. And America, a lot of people say, condemn this, condemn that, whatever. Your taxes literally fund the occupation of Palestinians. $4 billion every single year. And that's not with the extra care packages of billions that Biden likes to send along. So that is our second demand. And our third demand is that we demand the end to the 16-year-long siege in Gaza. The blockade be lifted. This is a form of collective punishment, which is against international law, of course. But the siege needs to end.
Absolutely. So, you said a lot of very important things in that. So I want to break it apart a little bit. And one thing, that I think needs to be stated is the manufacturing of consent by the Western media. And I want to say that there has been a tiny bit of change in the past few days, weeks maybe, but at the very beginning, it was like a game that Israel was playing. Like, what can we put out and lie about or mislead? Because sometimes it's not just the quote unquote lie, right? It's just misleading or the twisting of fact. And in each day from October 7th on, they just put out different things, and the media kept picking it up and running as though it was true. And then the bombing of the Al Ali hospital, they initially came out and the prime minister's comms person was like, oh, Israel did it. And then Israel put out a video that they on Twitter that they had to delete. And then Israel said that they found a recording of Hamas fighters, and that was debunked by experts. But the Western media was like, oh, well, Israel's saying that they didn't bomb the hospital, even though they had bombs right around the hospital the past few days, given the hospital an evacuation warning. And so that's just one example of the manufacturing of consent. And what do you think? What have you seen in different things that you want to call out?
The media, is meant to critically engage with things that, they're reporting on. They're meant to verify claims. The so-called 40 beheaded babies was regurgitated by Joe Biden, and he said that he had seen the photos, even though he hadn't. They report insane things like, resistance fighters had printed manuals on how to create chemical weapons. I feel like maybe they don't want to carry like digital versions, like a USB. Why are they carrying all that paper?
The hard copy.
And no one pushes back. What's crazy is that not only are they, blatantly putting these lies and propaganda, no one pushes back. They're just stenographers for colonialism, for Zionist apologia. And that's always been how it's been reported on. So, a lot of times media talk about, violence, You only report on violence when Palestinians choose to resist, when Palestinians, are defending themselves. But the 75-year colonial violence you've never reported on, they've been trying to link every single person in Gaza to a terrorist group, another way to manufacture consent, to carpet bomb all of these people. And Israel has a very well documented history of lying. They've lied about so many instances. One of the most famous ones is about the murder of journalist Shina Abu Akleh, where they assassinated her. And at the end, after lie after lie after lie, they eventually admitted to it. And this is a journalist. This is your fellow colleague. And they didn't even push back on that. So, and honestly, what has been the most disgusting is Biden coming out and saying that he doubts that the numbers of deaths coming out of Gaza are actually true, which is horrific. It is genocide denial.
Denied, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's just disgusting. And Joe Biden is complicit, right? And so that was a move to try to distance himself from the violence that is actually occurring. And you brought this up a little bit ago about 9/11, right? This was just like 9/11. And as soon as they started saying this is Israel's 9/11, I'm sure a lot of other people were like, oh my God, they're going to do this again. They're going to try this again. And there are just so many similarities, right? The manufacturing of the lies from the governments, but also what post 9/11 was like in this country for many Muslims and Arab Americans, right? The surveillance and the policing from state and non-state actors. And it's just like very troubling to use that language. And why would you use that language? They were preparing us for everything that was going to come. But just a general question, in your analysis of like, we're making this comparison to 9/11, I think that there is a lot more pushback, although that there was a strong anti-war peace movement saying no to the war in 2001 and then in 2003. Have you seen, what is your analysis on the reaction to the government continuing this ongoing genocide?
So there's been a lot of, repression, which we've always seen. There's always been attempts to silence Palestinians, which we've always seen. But there's also been a very, nefarious and chilling climate that we've seen. There have been attempts to link Palestinian organizers, whether that's student organizers or just organizers in general, to materially supporting quote unquote terror groups, which has very harmful implications on organizers, especially those who, have undocumented status or refugees or what have you. And we've seen, Florida, for example, try to ban SJPs, Students for Justice in Palestine. We've seen, those trucks going around with just students who support Palestinians' rights to, exist in peace and are against colonialism and have their faces plastered out there. We've seen people lose their jobs. We've seen people being murdered. There's a case 2 weeks ago of Wadia, who was a 6-year-old Palestinian who was stabbed 26 times in the States. And the person who murdered him said that he didn't want to see him grow up to be a terrorist. That is purely a response from both the media and the politicians. So they have the blood of that child alongside thousands of others in a sound hands.
100%. As soon as they started rolling out, I mean, they've been saying this about Palestinians for a long time, about and all people in the Middle East that are terrorists. But as soon as they started rolling out Israel's 9/11, the terrorist attack, it's us versus the terrorists. It's like you all are sounding like George Bush. And 20 years ago, like 20 years removed from that, it's like, do we not realize what is happening here? And you made the point about college students. Joe Biden's plan to, quote unquote, combat anti-Semitism on college campuses was to create a new task force with Homeland Security, working with local law enforcement around those colleges to track hate and anti-Semitic speech online. What do you think that is going to lead to? Like, just not even getting into and seeing any details of the plan. Like, what that we're stupid, that we don't know what's going to happen from this?
What's so crazy is that, like, it's the same 9/11 playbook, and America's foreign policy tends to also be a similar playbook, and we know exactly how it's going to play out. So increased surveillance, we're going to see increased surveillance on students. We're going to see increased violence against students in retribution. We're going to see a complete crackdown on any form of Palestinian support. And we've already seen this across the world. So the UK has banned Palestinian flags, has banned any type of Palestinian protest. France has done the same. Germany has done the same. So we're gearing towards that, where a Palestinian flag will be, seen as a quote unquote anti-Semitic, form of like a hate crime.
Hate speech, yeah.
Hate speech, absolutely. And we've seen this too in our local school boards. So we've seen children being sent home for a Palestinian flag or for wearing a kufiya. We've seen teachers demonize Palestinian children and say that they deserve what happened because of the events of October 7th. We've seen children be attacked on school premises and teachers not stepping in whatsoever. The statements coming out obviously are going to be one-sided in full favor of the Zionist entity. And Palestinian students are feeling very, very unsafe. And there's no one to challenge this, especially with the full backing of our governments.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw yesterday, Kamala Harris tweeted out something about the White House's plan to combat the rise in Islamophobia. And it's like, well, what's your plan is probably going to lead to more surveillance and policing too. So, and I think in whatever is happening, the rise of Islamophobia and the rise of anti-Semitism is directly related to the U.S. funding Israel dropping bombs on Gaza. So if you want to combat hate speech, it's directly linked to the U.S. support. And like you said previously, these are our tax dollars. And so we, for those of us living in this country, we have a duty to call and call representatives as I don't know how fruitful calls are, but calls in conjunction with other action call for the ceasefire, but also an end to U.S. aid to Israel. And that's not even counting Joe Biden wanting to pass an emergency aid package for an additional $14 billion to Israel. And also what is happening in the Middle East right now is that U.S. bases and U.S. ships are being attacked. The United States retaliated last week and bombed Iranian base in Syria, or where Iranian troops were in Syria. And so it's like 9/11, Israel's 9/11, it sure sounds like they're preparing for another war in the Middle East.
And what's so interesting about that is that 9/11, Iraqis had nothing to do with 9/11.
Right.
Afghans had nothing to do with 9/11. It was Saudi, one of, America's closest allies, who they were supporting for decades, to, bomb and obliterate the people of Yemen and provided them the weapons for that. So I think they also count on American ignorance or lack of geopolitical understanding of where specific countries are. But you're exactly right. This Islamophobic rhetoric, this demonization, this manufacture of consent paints people from the Middle East, paints racialized people, paints Muslims all in the same stroke. We're all terrorists. We're all responsible. We're all the enemy. And, we are in a holy war. We need to, unite and fight against the enemy.
And yeah, the one thing is that there are Jewish and Catholic, Christian, I won't say Catholic, Jewish and Christian people in Gaza and in Palestine. And so Israel just bombed a church the other day. And so for them to say it's some religious holy war, well, actually, that's not. They try to frame it that way. But there have been Palestinians of many different faiths, right? Living before Israel existed, and even now, there are Palestinians of many faiths, right?
Absolutely. And, it's not a Muslim versus, Jewish situation. Palestinians, as you said, of all religions, regardless, will be killed and bombed by virtue of being Palestinian, by virtue of being indigenous, by virtue of being decolonized. And that's what that narrative, they're able to sell that narrative because when you decontextualize the events, for example, of the 7th, from the history, you're able to paint Palestinians as the aggressors. And when you remove it from 75 years of colonial violence and way more than 75 years of colonial violence, like the Balfour Declaration, today's the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. We're signed.
Let's take a sidebar for a second. And can you explain the 100-year anniversary of the Balfour Declaration?
So the Balfour Declaration was a document signed by Arthur Balfour, which basically signed away Palestine to the 6% minority of Jewish settlers who would come into Palestine. Of course, there always have been Jewish Palestinians who existed in Palestine, but this was specific to Zionism, to the Western colonial construct of Zionism, the Western settler coming in from Europe. And what a lot of people don't know is that Arthur Balfour himself was anti-Semitic. A lot of proponents or supporters in Zionism are anti-Semitic. In the States, the biggest bloc that support Zionism are evangelical Christians.
Yes.
So a lot of people don't know that, and they're all, anti-Semitic, wanting to kick people out of a country, put them, halfway across the globe. For the second coming or whatever the belief is not, something that's grounded in love of Jewish people.
Right.
So, the Arthur Balfour was the first, colonial declaration that signed away, Palestinian land to a foreign settler, to a foreign colonial, entity. And it is where, colonial domination began, on record.
Yes, and so for so many people that are talking about this issue and they don't want to acknowledge that Israel is a settler colony, it's like read a book because it's actually plainly written right in front of you. It is a British colonial project, and then one of the main designers in the creation of Israel's state, Theodore Herzl, he even said in his writings that Israel is a settler colony. And so for Israel supporters to not accept that it's literally settler colonialism, it's like you are just lying, and you don't even know your own history, right? Like you aren't even true to the fact of what Israel is trying to do. And for a lot of people, what we're seeing now is didn't we all agree that settler colonialism in this country, in the United States and Canada, about what we did to indigenous folks, to black folks, that was bad, right? I thought we had gotten to a point where a majority of people could at least say the founding of these countries was bad. Well, we're seeing it happen right again in Israel. And in Palestine by Israel, and it's those comparisons are readily obvious. And I was wondering, why do you think people either intentionally don't want to see that, or they try to avoid, the very apt comparison of settler colonialism across the world?
Well, I have 2 points to that. First, going back, you're right. Theodore Herzl called it a colonial movement. He also wrote to Cecil Rhodes and said, I have an interest in...
Cecil Rhodes. Wow. Was not a guy?
No. He did a little bit of colonization, and he actually wrote to him and said, you guys, you love colonialism. I see that you're doing a lot of it. I have an opportunity for you to do some more. Jabotinsky, all these, architects of Zionism, early on, Zionist thinkers, all said it for what it was.
Right.
Colonialism, even the funds set up or the institutions set up were things like the Jewish Colonial Fund or the Palestine Colonial Fund. So it was very clear from the get-go what it was. But now you have this whitewashing of history, this liberal Zionism that tries to paint itself up a leftist ideology, that tries to erase all of that. And, going back to why do people ignore that? It's just interesting to me that, the UK or Britain, the United States, Germany, all of the West, France, who have a legacy of colonialism and continuation of neo-colonialism, would support a land back movement. If you just have to think about it, why would these colonial enterprises, imperialist nations, all support a land back movement? And I think that any type of policy or position that benefits the West, most of those within that nation will, adhere to because of propaganda, because of the media. But, as we said before, what we've been seeing, I think this is what the rise of social media is, that when people from those countries are able to access different sources, are able to research things for themselves, it's very, 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 very clear what is going on.
Yeah, especially right now, just the scenes that we're seeing come out of Gaza, how is this acceptable to the international community? We can see people with their smartphones videoing like just towns and buildings destroyed in rubble, and there are kids, there are people under the rubble. They have to dig them out. We have videos of nurses and doctors in the hospital, and they recognize one of their family members. And it's just, it is good that we have social media and other people can see what is going on in Palestine. But it's like the fact that we can see it, and there are plenty of people that are not in power that are moved to change, right? But there are people in power that refuse to accept the reality. And it's like what you said, they have an interest in this colonial project. If we see a free Palestine in our lifetime, that will be a significant blow to colonialism everywhere. And so we are looking at potentially, one of the most damaging things to the imperial core of the United States, the UK, Israel. And do you have any thoughts about, where exactly we are in potentially delivering a huge blow to these colonial projects?
Well, Joe Biden has described, and he's repeated these remarks from the 1980s, that if there wasn't an Israel, they would create an Israel, and that Israel is one of the biggest investments in the United States. So it's just an imperialist, outpost in the region. And that's the same reason that Britain invested in it. And it's because of its, geographic location. And it was able to, access major ports. And post, World War I and the fall of the Ottoman Empire, that was the way that it's able to, have a stake and have control in the area. What we're seeing not only, people of the living in the imperial core rise up against the government, we're seeing the third world rise up. So the protests are not only in Western countries. These protests have always been, in the Arab world, in the global South, but they've risen to just unprecedented levels, hundreds of thousands. We're seeing governments kick out, Israeli ambassadors. Tunisia recently proposed a bill that would criminalize any form of normalization. So, with the Abraham Accords, there was this defeatist attitude that, we're heading to a situation where this is going to be accepted, where this is going to be the norm. And, the Palestinian people have never for a second given up their cause, have never for a second given up their struggle. And what we're seeing today is the fruits of that labor, and we'll continue to see it until we see it liberate Palestine from the river to the sea.
Absolutely. And let's briefly discuss what a free Palestine looks like. What the rights of return? What exactly does a free Palestine look like?
Yeah, so a lot of demonization of Free Palestine is just colonial projections. It's just Zionist projections. A lot of things that Zionists accuse Palestinians of, they're doing themselves. So this claim that, the chant from the river to the sea refers to pushing Jews in the sea is literally what they did in the Nakba in 1948. They literally pushed Palestinians into the sea when they ethnically cleansed out. So a liberated Palestine looks like a Palestine free of military checkpoints, of settlements, of open air prisons, of prisons where thousands and thousands of Palestinian political prisoners are held hostage, with a lot of them being children. Free Palestine looks like Palestinians in exile, who are one of the largest refugee populations in the world coming back home. It looks like Palestinians who have been living in refugee camps within their own country, within their own land, and outside of it for generations, coming back home. And, a lot of people forget that the right of return is integral to the liberation of Palestine.
Absolutely. And I love that. And one of the most inspiring things is it's sad as well. I do want to say this, but there are pictures of older Palestinians with their keys, right, from centuries ago, decades ago. That is sad, right? That they were kicked out of homes, they had the keys. But people like you organizing with Palestinian Youth Movement, Palestinians all around the world, we're coming back for those homes. We are going to honor our ancestors. And I think that is inspiring for everyone. Everyone across the world should be inspired, because a free Palestine is one step closer for freeing all of us, right? It's one step closer to ending these violent colonial projects. Can you talk about where we are at in this moment, compared to 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, just about where public opinion has shifted? And because to me, it seems like the moment and the attention has never been bigger and more substantial for pro-Palestinian cause.
Absolutely. So I think that, in comparison to, I always used to look at Sheikh Jarrah as the turning point of when international opinion started to humanize Palestinians. But I really think this is the pivotal moment where people have not only supported, a free Palestine, but have supported the right for Palestinians to fight for their land and the right for Palestinians to liberate themselves from colonial violence. It's social media has been able to, educate youth. We're seeing a huge change in the opinion of youth, especially, and that includes Jewish youth. There's so many anti-Zionist Jewish people who refuse to be complicit in a government that is using their religion for a fascist ethno-state or fascist colonial project. So I think the tide is turning. Israel invests so much in Hasbara. Hasbara is propaganda. It's the term propaganda they use. And this propaganda is always geared towards a Western lens. And like you mentioned 9/11, the term Israel's 9/11. There are a lot of, American settlers living in quote-unquote Israel, but it's 9/11 has nothing to do with someone living in the Middle East. That would not be a turning point in their history. That's purposeful because it's meant to play on specific emotions of Americans. They've been putting ads on YouTube where there's, children videos and then the most grotesque things ever trying to play on that sympathy card. We've seen so many different types of propaganda campaigns pop up, and like celebrities are a big backing of these. But it has not worked. Like it has been able to, usually you see this complete I would say, like a mask of propaganda covering what's been happening, but you've been able to see the actual plight pierce through consistently and continue to pierce through, despite them murdering so many journalists and trying to silence.
Why do you think that is, though? Why? We understand the phenomenon, and there's been years and years, but just your own personal analysis, why do you think that the propaganda, that propaganda shield, why is it faulty?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think one of the reasons that people can identify with the Palestinian cause, there is a famous quote by Ghassan Kanafani, which he was a Palestinian theorist, literary resistance fighter, part of the PFLP, and he said that the two codes, as in cause, the cause for anyone, not just a Palestinian, it's the cause for any revolutionary, the justice, but also that imperialism has dominated the world, and if you strike it anywhere, its head in the Middle East, it's like, in Africa, anywhere you strike it, you will serve the world revolution. So Palestine is not disconnected from these other systems of domination, these systems of oppression. So, a big one is the policing system in the United States. A lot of people now know how connected it is to Israel. These weapons test their surveillance technologies and their weapons on Palestinians and market it as battle tested. And then they, export it to the United States. And like a lot of the surveillance technology from 9/11 came from Israel. So these systems work in tandem with one another. Imperialism, is a big cloak that's linked with all these different systems of domination. And anywhere, like a second economy says, you strike it, you serve the world revolution. And a lot of people have identified with the cause for justice. And I think that that's something that the average human being can connect to. But also there are, just immense amounts of oppression within the imperial core that are connected to different struggles. And a lot of people are seeing solidarity, like a lot of bonds of solidarity formed because of it. And an example of that is, the Indigenous communities in Canada are very connected to the Palestinian cause because they're, fighting the same system of colonial domination. A lot of people living in the States who are subjected to state violence also find a connection to the Palestinian plight for similar reasons.
Yeah, there is the deadly exchange, which is the where American police departments go over to Israel and they train with the IDF, and they come back and they use that same training against mainly Black and brown folks in America. And so our struggles are deeply connected. We also know that at the Cop City police training facility in Atlanta, we know if that gets built, that the IDF is planning to come train with police departments in America at Cop City. That there's already the Georgia Law Enforcement Connection Group, GLEE, or whatever it is, that connects Atlanta police with the IDF. And so those plans are already in the mix. And then to draw another connection, those people protesting and advocating against Cop City in Atlanta are being charged under domestic terrorism and RICO charges. There are 61 people facing RICO charges for protesting Cop City. The state is calling them terrorists. And we can connect that to the Palestinian struggle, where they want to deem all Palestinians, all people that live in Gaza, as terrorists. And that's also one thing I wanted to ask you as well, that nonviolent resistance, nonviolence has been attempted for a long time in Palestine. And even then, tens of thousands of people were arrested and labeled terrorists. And so can you give some background of just actions that Gaza Palestinians have taken over the past 10, 20 years, that when I want to quote Martin Luther King here. He said, "Those who make nonviolent revolution impossible make violence inevitable." And we're not here to talk about any violence, but I do want to talk about the actions that those in Gaza have taken, and we have not seen a change to the open air prison in the past 16 years. So can you just talk about that briefly?
Absolutely. So both Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza have tried to, resist nonviolently, or tried to express their, discontent over their poor living conditions nonviolently. And that's been met with state repression and immense amounts of violence. And a very good example of that is the 2018 Great March of Return. So the Great March of Return was a symbolic walk in Gaza where, hundreds, thousands of peasants marched to the prison wall that Israel constructed to keep them in. And they marched in a symbolic gesture of right of return, to return to their lands. A lot of people don't know that the people of Gaza, 80% of them are refugees from the Nakba, which is why I have family in there. It's because of the Nakba, where they were all pushed into this tiny, very densely populated area of land. And some of them even, their lands or their homes are the settlements that are constructed around them, military outposts meant to keep them in, and they can't even, cross the fence to their own homes. So they marched with Palestinian flags. It was peaceful. There was children, women, nurses, medics, people of all walks of life. And the Israeli occupational forces killed 200 of them, and they sniped and maimed 36,000 of them, aiming at their knees and legs to maim them permanently, and pressure the already crippled Palestinian healthcare infrastructure. So that's just one example of many. The PA, which serves as Israel's comprador colonial class in the West Bank, also imprisons Palestinians for protesting en masse. Israel as well. So, the number of Palestinian political prisoners previous to October 7th was 5,000. It's now 10,000. And their crime was also dissent and peacefully protesting the conditions. And, the United States talks a lot, too, about nonviolence and supporting nonviolence and blah, blah. When in 37 states, BDS is illegal. BDS is the boycott, divest, sanction movement modeled after South African apartheid, where it is a movement to put pressure on Israel to stop its human rights violations. And yet a boycott is illegal in 37 states. And a lot of people talk about the important right, freedom of speech, but I don't know how that would apply.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've seen here in the States, to crack down on BDS. One thing I think it would be important for people listening: what actions can those of us in the States take against businesses and institutions beyond politicians, those that are complicit in Zionism? What actions can we take?
So targeted boycotts are very, very effective. If you go to the BDS Movement's website, which is bdsmovement.com, there are a lot of brands to focus on. A lot of people, and I really enjoy seeing when movements are started from within from within the people, from within themselves. And the new companies that have been targeted have been Starbucks, for them choosing to sue their union over support for Palestine. Another one is McDonald's for sending free meals to feed the soldiers that go then massacre Palestinians. That's just a few of them. So engaging in targeted boycotts is very effective. Calling for sanctions is also effective. So the boycott, divestment, sanction movement is not only boycott, it's also to divest from any type of institutions in Israel, and to also sanction Israel to stop its human rights violations. And something else that people can do as well is, especially right now, is to organize sit-ins, is to attend rallies, is to, call your politicians, much as that, is not the way to liberation, but it is a form of pressure that you can exert. PYN is organizing alongside a lot of other groups a call to action November 4th. So in the United States, that is in Washington, and we're expecting upwards of 150,000 people, which is super amazing and exciting. And in Canada, in your locale, you will find an action on the same day. So it's a call to the people to, come out, support, and show our governments that we do not endorse this genocide, and we refuse to support materially the massacre and murder and repression of Palestinians.
Yes, the U.S. funds $4 billion every single year for Israel. We have a stake in this. We should end that. And calling your representatives is just one part of it. It is definitely encouraged. I think people should do it, but also, get more involved in the organizing around Palestine. Before we go, one thing I did want to talk about is the crackdown on. I'm going to have to cut this part and restart my question. One thing I wanted to talk about was the use and shield of quote unquote anti-Semitism related to criticism of Israel, and how troubling that is, not only for non-Jews but for Jewish people themselves. When you conflate the state of Israel with Jewish people, and then the state of Israel carries out a genocide, the state of Israel is basically saying, yes, as Jewish people, this is what we're doing, which is not not what is happening, right? It is an pure power state of Israel, separate from Jewish people. But if you just talk about, this blanket anti-Semitism that many are throwing out for any criticism of Israel.
Palestinians will be the first to separate the colonial state from the religion. And yet when Palestinians criticize Israel, we will be painted anti-Semitic for, attacking all Jewish people. So the people who conflate Judaism with the state of Israel are Zionists. The same people who bring up the dual loyalty trope and act like they're against it, they're the same ones reinforcing it. And what that does is that actually harms Jewish communities when we're using that term consistently. When there are actual rises of anti-Semitism or attacks of anti-Semitism, they won't get taken seriously anymore, because people are seeing any type of dissent automatically labeled as anti-Semitic. And people will no longer, take heed to that. They're not going to believe it anymore. So I think it's disgusting. There's definitions like the IRA definition that have been passed in a lot of governments, a lot of provincial institutions as well, in Canada here too. And basically it is a definition that equates any form of criticism of Israel to anti-Semitism. And that means that university students, professors can get prosecuted for hate crimes. And it stifles freedom of speech, and it criminalizes any type of dissent. So I think that we need to reject it, need to reject this conflation. And I think that we shouldn't cower to it. A lot of people get scared. A lot of people, want to stay silent because of this. I think that we should confront it and call it for what it is. It is a scapegoat, and it's an attempt to silence Palestinian voices and their allies. And we, of course, should call out anti-Semitism whenever we see it, and not allow Zionists to, use anti-Semitism as a deflection from the war crimes that the Zionist state is committing.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you saw a bunch of these Israeli representatives at the UN wore the Star of David. That's just disgusting that you're using your faith in your people's history like that, right? That you're using the Holocaust and the fucking horrible things that happened to Jewish people, and you're using that to justify your genocide. That's disgusting. Also, I know plenty of Jewish people that do not agree with that, right? I know plenty. There's been a rise of anti-Zionist Jewish people raising their voice, saying this. We don't, not in our name, right? That's a lot of what they're saying. It's just so gross.
A lot of people do bring up the Holocaust as a way to justify its true, but Palestinians had nothing to do with the Holocaust. It's Europe, like European anti-Semitism, that we're paying the price for. They're trying to wash their hands of the centuries of horrific pogroms and just disgusting anti-Semitism by blaming on the Palestinians. And you have people like Netanyahu saying that, genocide denial, saying that Palestinians had played a part in the Holocaust. So I think that's a good point to go off.
And Gigi and Bella Hadid's father, I saw a video of him telling a story that his family took in some Jewish people that were fleeing during World War II. They accepted them into his house, lived with them for years, and then I think his mother had an operation, or they were actually. I think it was his birth that they had left and come back, and they were locked out of their house by the same people that they had helped. And I'm sure that is a story that a lot of people, a lot of Palestinians, their families have, right? And so Palestinians had no part in the Holocaust. And then after that, they see their homes taken away. What is going on here, everyone? What we have enough history to know what this is, right?
And this conflation of all Palestinians being anti-Semitic and the Arabs all being anti-Semitic, when the history shows you that the anti-Semitism, the horrific pogroms, the horrific attacks against Jewish people was Europe. It's a European sin that was rooted in Christianity in Europe. That's not anything that has to do with Palestinians. And Europe has tried to wash away its sins by putting the blame on Palestinians. Palestinians are paying the price of the Holocaust, something that is a European crime that was birthed out of European anti-Semitism. And then you have people like Bibi Netanyahu doing genocide denial and linking and blaming Palestinians for the Holocaust, which is just a complete whitewashing of history, just complete revisionism. And I think that we should just call out these disgusting blanket smears for what they are and not cower down to them.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, is there anyone that you want to honor? Anyone that you would like to, let the world know about?
I think I want to honor all of our martyrs from, 1936 uprising, from, previous to that, who have spent, their lives fighting against Zionist incursion, against imperialism. I want to, a lot of people, or the U.S. specifically, recently took a picture of college students, lighting up the word "Glory to our martyrs" on, I think, a campus. And they tried to say that this was a form of, encouraging terrorism. I just want to explain what glory.
Yeah, please.
So for us, anyone who is murdered by...
What do you say us? It's and language, right? Related to Arabic language.
Absolutely. So it's not just Muslims, it's an Arab term. Like Shina Barakla is also a martyr, even though she's Christian. So our martyrs are those who were killed by the Zionist kind of entity, but their lives are a sacrifice for the revolution, for the struggle. And we honor every single one of them, and that includes children who were massacred and murdered. They are all martyrs, and our martyrs push us forward. Their sacrifices will not, go unheard or unmet, and we will, use their deaths, their sacrifices as a way to push us forward. And as much as it is horrific to, open up your phone or look back home or what have you and see the numbers reach 9,000, 9,500, we will see liberation. Our martyrs does not go in vain. Just because we mourn our martyrs does not mean that we are defeated. We mourn our martyrs and our cause for liberation, for justice will never, ever die.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss?
I just want to bring attention to the action on November 4th. So wherever you are, look it up. You might have one in your locale. If not, go to the Palestinian Youth Movement, to the website or to the Instagram page, and we will endorse your call to action, support it, organize sit-ins, call your MPs. As much as I hate to draw petitions, camp outside of news media outlets who refuse to call things for what they are, camp outside of your politicians' offices, just refuse to be complicit and demand a ceasefire now, demand an end to this genocide, and don't back down. The numbers are climbing at horrific levels, and don't let this desensitize you either. Don't let this defeat you. Don't let this demotivate you. Let this motivate you. This is a struggle. This is a struggle that has been going on for 75 years and will continue to go on, and we need to be active participants in supporting this struggle.
Absolutely. People can disrupt roadways. They can sabotage the production of weapons. You can see that with Palestine action, the two people standing on a roof stop the production of weapons. People can take action in a lot of ways. And thank you so much, Shatha, for the work that you do and PYN is doing. Without the organizing that Palestinian Youth Movement has done, we would not be at the point we're at now, where we're seeing millions of people around the world flood the streets in support of Palestine. So thank you so much for all that you're doing and the group as a whole. Do you want to be found on social media, or do you want not to be found?
I mean, I don't really post anymore. I would redirect them to the Palestinian Youth Movement socials. I think they're a lot better. Our social media team is really good. So I would redirect them to those channels.
Yes. Let me see. Let me get the handles. On Twitter, it is PAL Youth Movement. And then on Instagram, it is the Palestinian Youth Movement. They, like Shatha says, they have great social media. They will keep you well informed of all current events. And so tap in with them. So to wrap it up, Google LASD Games, Stop Cop City, and Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Peace.